New revelations from the lockdown file show that the UK's leaders made a coordinated campaign to escalate public fear over COVID. WhatsApp messages published over the weekend exposed Matt Hancock telling his media advisor Damon Poole he wanted to deploy a new variant of the virus that would frighten the pants off the public just ahead of Christmas 2020. The same month, Hancock was trying to pass in Parliament the tiered system of regional COVID lockdowns, and 95 COVID-resistant backbench Tories were marked onto a secret red list. It's almost like something out of Stalin, isn't it? One of the MPs rated as a hardline rebel on the list was Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown. Alongside this comment, "No, will vote against Her Majesty's government or maybe abstain," feels like there is a lack of parliamentary scrutiny of the tier system. Well, I'm very pleased to say that Sir Geoffrey joins me now. And you would go on to abstain from that Parliament vote, wouldn't you, over regional lockdown? So why weren't you taken in by Project Fear?
Well, I just feel that the whole COVID policy at that time was just so unrelated to the facts. We weren't getting the proper facts. And above all, this is a freedom-loving nation. This goes against all our principles. It wasn't necessary to lock us down to the extent that we were. And I think Matt Hancock would be pleased to be operating the COVID policy in China. Such was the zeal that he wanted to lock every single person in their own home. And I just feel that it needed parliamentarians like me to stand up against this. And
well, yeah, but I've got to be honest with you, though, Sir Jeff. I've got to be honest with you, though, Sir Geoffrey. It's not a great look for the party that you love, that so many of those people that you described there as wanting to live in China and be so draconian, etc., unfortunately, are in your party, aren't they?
Well, I think it was people like me who stood up against the government that finally shocked the government in doing the right thing and letting us all live our normal lives before Christmas in 2021. Otherwise, we'd have been locked down again in Christmas 21. And it was that rebellion, that big rebellion in October, that stopped the thing dead. So I think that we who voted against the government did exactly the right thing to look after the interests of the people of this country.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people watching this will be immensely grateful to you. But, Sir Geoffrey, if somebody like you, if someone of your eminent standing can be put on a red list and maybe ostracised a little bit and, well, it might be called the red list, it's a blacklist, really, isn't it? Then does that not mean that for ordinary people like me and the audience here watching this, well, they should be very concerned. If they can do that to you, what can they do to me?
Well, that's what we're there for, Patrick, is to stand up to a government when it gets overmighty. And that is what I felt my duty was, and that is what I did. And I would do it again, because I think it is right that we treat the people of this country with respect and with having proper rights and not expecting them to be burdened by an overarching government.
So, Geoffrey, I think what these lockdown files have shown, in part, is the ugliest elements of government, which is shameless self-promotion and ego at the expense of elderly people who are dying, elderly people who go on to die, early years child education, public freedoms, etc., and even colleagues. I mean, this is a catastrophic advert for the current crop of politicians, Sir Geoffrey, yourself not included.
Well, I think there's I agree with a lot of that, Patrick, but I do think it's very easy to be wise with hindsight, particularly at the early stages. And I was rebelling at the later stages when I thought the whole thing had gone on too long. At the early stages, we thought 2.5 million people were going to be hospitalised, of which 400,000 were going to die. Those are figures produced from SPI-M. So I think it's very, very easy to be wise with hindsight. And I think the government were too slow to react to the new variant of the virus and unlock us, as it were. And that is why I was voting against the government.
What does everyone say about Matt Hancock behind his back now, then?
Well, I think he's yesterday's figure, and I think everybody's quite pleased that he's not standing for Parliament again. And we need to move on from this whole COVID thing and try and do the right thing by the people of this government, this country.
OK, all right. And there were calls for him to be dragged back to Parliament and, in some cases, quite literally, actually, to face serious scrutiny as to why a centre for people with learning disabilities has still not been built in Bury North. The speculation there is that the MP in question there, who voted against Matt Hancock's lockdown rules and regs, was denied that centre for disabled children in his constituency because he did rebel. Do you think Matt Hancock should be dragged back to Parliament to face scrutiny over that?
Well, I think it's absolutely shocking if that is correct. That centre should have been built, and that member of Parliament should have stood up, as the rest of us did, against these lockdown arrangements. And yes, if Matt Hancock wants to come and make a statement to Parliament, I'm sure that would be welcome, so we can actually hear his side of the story.
You've got to admit, though, that Matt Hancock was aided and abetted by a willing media, OK? And that is something that winds me right up. And we've seen it today, Sir Geoffrey, with Rishi Sunak's thing about wanting to stop the boats. We've got the usual types, Robert Peston, in about 4.5 hours, managing to basically say to Rishi Sunak, oh, you heartless, how on earth can you be doing this? Were you born without a soul, OK? And the media just lap it up. And you've got Matt Hancock there, who was able to deploy a new variant, scare the pants off the nation. All of these stats that turned out that they weren't necessarily always as accurate as they could have been. He knew he could dish all of this out unopposed because the media wanted harder, swifter, faster, longer lockdowns. And surely the media have a bit to blame here.
Yes, they do. The left-wing media do have a bit to blame. And but our job as politicians is to stand up for and be accountable at the next election for what we believe in. And I believe that what Suelo's doing on these small boats is absolutely the right thing. Now, Robert may huff and puff. I have a lot of respect for Robert, but I think he's wrong. I think the British people do want us to take action on these boats. We've been very generous.
There you go. And that's a key point. That's a key point. And I want to talk to you about that. Do you think it's insulting to the British people, actually, after the likes of Robert Peston and co stood up there and really pushed for lockdowns and pushed for restrictions to our freedoms? And then on top of that now, they tried to say that we are not a generous country. You go and look at the average common man and woman's tax bill at the end of every single month, and you tell us that we're not generous people, Sir Geoffrey.
He is dead wrong, Patrick. We've taken in 60,000 people, Afghanistanis, Hong Kong people, Ukrainians. I mean, the British people have been one of the most generous in the world at taking in Ukrainian families. So I think it's absolutely dead wrong to say that we're not generous. And I think the British people do want us to do something about the unauthorised boats that come across the channel. I really do think that.
All right, now, just quickly, do you think that Matt Hancock should be banned from ever standing for public office ever again? Because I know that he wants to step down at the next election, but this guy, he's going to try and do an old Lazarus number, isn't he, at some point in his life? He's already tried it with the old I'm a celebrity nonsense and rumours of some other shows that he's been getting involved in. He wants a full-frontal revival at some point. Should we say, as a nation, Matt Hancock can never run for office again?
Well, that's a matter for Parliament, but I think, frankly, he's very unlikely to be selected for a seat to fight for Parliament again. So I think he's probably now finished his parliamentary career, and he better go off to an island to become a celebrity on the media and make comments as he likes on the media.
Can I ask you, Geoffrey, I spoke to you quite a bit during the old lockdown days, and I must say I always thoroughly enjoyed our conversations, as I have done tonight. There must have been a period of time when you really wrestled with the decision to go against what your own party was pushing. And that must have been a real moral decision for you. How do you feel now? I imagine you sleep very well at night.
It was a difficult decision at the time because I didn't know for sure that I was right. Had I and my colleagues got it wrong, and a huge number of more people had died as a result of our actions, then that would have been very uncomfortable indeed. So I don't regret what I did. I would do it again. I think it's absolutely right that members of Parliament stick up for what they think the British people would want and then be accountable at the next general election. And it needs people like me who are not going to be cowed from doing what they think is right.
Yeah, look, fantastic. I've just got to ask you one more, if that's all right, because I couldn't help but notice that Sir Graham Brady has decided to shuffle off. Now, he is, of course, an MP for Altrincham and Sale, and he is, more crucially, the chairman of the 1922 Backbench Committee. And, Sir Geoffrey, if he thought you were going to win the next election, he would stick around, would he not? He's only 55.
No, I think you've hit it on the nail on the head. The head on the nail there. He is only 55. You have to make a decision in life. If you're going to swap careers, there's an age which you have to do it by. And I suspect that Graham has got something else in mind, and he's made a good mark in politics. And I think he probably now feels the time is right to move on to something else.
And actually, it's worth noting as well that one of his final acts for his constituency was, as we understand it, to make sure that a hotel that was going to be used for the asylum seekers there was used predominantly to house women and children, not young single men. And I've got no doubt that the vast majority of the people in Altrincham and Sale West, I think it is, will be quite grateful of that. So, Geoffrey, thank you very much. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, an absolute legend.
Thank you, Patrick.
That's all right. Now, a spokesperson for Matt Hancock said that the message exchange was an entirely partial account. Anyway, he added, the missing context here is vitally important because this vote was critical for saving lives. The right place to consider everything about the pandemic objectively is in the public inquiry. Yes, OK, all right.